when we talk about resilience, global issues, climate change, I would really like to use a picture from published in Nature regarding global risk network. It includes most of the potential risks human society is facing today. We know the global governance failures, if the tourists, or even now we know the climate change agreement is not, is failed, economic disparity, and here a major part actually is dealing with what we are talking about: climate change, air pollution, flooding, storm, cyclones, and food security, biodiversity loss. This accounts the issue we talk about, 1/3 of the risk globally are facing today. I love this picture very much, and I think Lana knows that, which was requested by the IGAC, National Global Atoms Chemistry, to put a conceptual about how the current society, human interaction, modify the nature system. So we talk about the human and the nature system interaction, and now I think the day we look at the nature system is not the same as nature system 100 years ago. It's actually under the risk, modified, and now we have to learn how to dealing with so many challenges behind that. So now one of the great issues I think the CRO2 is dealing with, I think the grand challenge, and how the sustainable future human society, human beings are living on. So this analysis of the topic, even though climate change and clean energy written here, actually all these topics are linking to each other. So we cannot separate them. Just one example, we have urbanization. We know urban cities very clearly showing how the human drivers inside the city and how it's internationally connect. So many factors are linking to each other, and this is I put this one try to address the issue that why we need such an interdisciplinary, so complicated system, and so many factors involved. And we've heard a lot of the social science, which I never heard about this, what we are concerned about. And another example, heard about the residential. Now, when we just dealing with air pollution in Beijing, and we figure out that we have deal outside Beijing, and also the issues beyond the energy, and also how the people just for the heating, so how to find the clean energy. So this means that one solution or a problem solution may be beyond this problem, the scope itself. And I will just quickly finish a few slides. When we're dealing with the policy making, this is a flowchart of U.S. ambient air quantities. You see a lot of processes going on, and to make sure we have the robust scientific evidence, and also the feedback from policymakers. This is how China is working on issue like this one. Well, this is too extreme. I think that shows that how we should build up more like the interaction from the public policy and scientific evidence. And there is one organization we are working on, we call the Monsoon Asia Indian Research Sustainability. It's a global research project on future Earth. There are many topics are similar, but it's at a different region. So this is talking about grassland, this one is coast zone, mountain zone, dryland, urban land. So, but it's in the Monsoon Asia area. This, I think, came to address issue like the global climate change, but the local initiative solution for that. So we have three topics. Resilience, I'm still learning from resilience to climate change, the nature disaster, the human health, and the water, energy, and the food connections. So that's I think pretty much reflects the importance of international collaboration at the different regions. With this one, I think I have my
Thank you.
few points.
Thank you very much, Tom. Mary, do you want to go next? Okay, great. It's very interesting, and we can discuss it later how MERS works at the global level, but also at the local level. And I think this is one of the major challenges of. I have to turn this off. Challenges of any center of excellence.
But while they're finding that, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy to always be back in Chile. It's a wonderful country, and to see good friendships that we've developed over the years. Thank you. So I live in a country of 54 million people with a rather varied history. And at the moment, we find ourselves in a little bit of an education crisis, in that there isn't sufficient funding in the country to educate everyone in tertiary institutions like we would like to see. So what have been the various approaches to trying to bring people up to a level at which they can then be advocates for whatever subject or serve in an advisory capacity? So what I have become the director of in the last 2 years is something called the Southern African Center for Systems Analysis. So most of the undergraduate education in South Africa is still very disciplinary. You're a chemist, you're a physicist, you're a meteorologist. You're not some kind of integrated, holistic thinking person. And that's certainly not going to change in the future. So it's only once you get into your postgraduate training at PhD and postdoc level do you start doing integrative science. So we work in everything from natural savanna vegetation all the way through rural livelihoods and the adoption of GM maize in South Africa. The forestry industry actually paid for my salary to keep me at the university and not go back into forestry consulting. Obviously, we've got mega herbivores that are changing the structure of the vegetation. We've got huge sandstorms, mega fires, and we've had people on our continent for many years. So the purpose of my institution these days is to train a new cohort of people who think in systems. And we're doing that very formally. Every year I take 20 PhD students that are funded by the government, and we run programs in any of these disciplinary areas, all the way from rural health through to understanding what elephants do in the landscape. 20 new PhD students every year are trained in systems analysis, some in the third year now, some up to training 60 students. And then I offer a course every year for young postdocs, 30 postdocs a year, on systems analysis, the mathematical modeling of systems. And that is our approach to building an interdisciplinary center. It's fully the philosophy is fully around building human capacity, essentially, for the continent. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm from there. If anyone recognizes that, upstate New York, nowhere near New York City. I grew up in a town of 176 people and 2,000 cows. And that's our farm, and it's a dairy farm, so we have a lot of cows and a lot of manure. And it was run sustainably until my brother stopped farming it just a few years ago, which is still a crisis in my life. Okay, so after the farm, I like this slide for a couple reasons. So I was born here. If you want to know the CO2 concentration when I was born, you have to go to the ice cores. For measurements. And then I got my bachelor's in physics from the University of Massachusetts. And then I went into oceanography, got a master's in oceanography. And then I finished my thesis and published it in oceanography. And then I quit. So I didn't actually get a PhD in oceanography. But I did get one in atmospheric sciences a few years later. And of course, there we are today at 405 parts per million. So in my lifetime, it's gone up by over 30%. 40%, and almost 45% from this study. Okay. Now I'm a professor at UW in Seattle, and also a professor at the University of Bergen in Norway, and a fellow of the Food Spirit Institute of Stanford. So I like visiting new places and new people. What I work on climate variability. What processes govern and what are the patterns of climate variability on incremental decadal timescales. I look at past climates, trying to understand, how mountain ranges and ice sheets affect climate, how changes in orbital forces affect the monsoons. I'm working obviously on past and future climates with high CO2, and actually about a third of my time is spent on understanding how climate variability and climate change is going to affect world food supply. I'm working with governments in Indonesia, Mexico, and a few other ones. Okay, so that's me.
So just a general question about the roles of Centers of Excellence on climate change. Mary talked about the importance of building human capacity, of focusing on training, on education and training of PhDs. Besides that, and maybe you can explain a little bit on how you do, what are the key what is the key role at the local level and at the global level of the Centers of Research on Climate Change?
I'll just kick off. So what's interesting for us is that because we work across disciplines in our training program, we spend 3 weeks, which seems like a very long time, with the 20 new students we take in every year to understand each other's terminology. And we spend a lot of time talking about what we mean by rural livelihoods, what we mean by climate change. Is it just temperature we're talking about, or is it rainfall distribution, or rainfall intensity, or stream flow runoff, or aquifer recharge? And we create almost like a mini dictionary of how we will use those words, so that we can start right from the beginning actually talking to each other and we all understand the same thing. So we spend a lot of time doing that, and I think an important area of that is we focus on the current usage of the term resilience, because we found that if you're going to offer advice to the government or to whoever, the business sector, you should be using at least the same concept of resilience amongst all of you. Because if you're within your own, let's say, advisory group or consultancy group, and you use this resilience terminology differently in the social sciences, the legal sciences, and the natural sciences, you actually do more harm than good. Because then the government pitches you against each other and says, hey, but that's not what David says. So we spend time on that word resilience.
Can I ask you, how do you, from the holistic point of view, how do you define resilience?
Okay, so
in the work you do?
So we base it on the ecological literature and stable states and perturbation to those stable states and the ability to move from one state to another state. We have completely tried to squash the idea that resilience means preservation, because it doesn't, and it shouldn't be used with that idea in mind. A lot of people think that resilience means you would like to go back to the place where you were, with the same biodiversity, with the same socioeconomic standards, with the same abject poverty, with the same non-sustainable use of your vegetation. So to go back to some idyllic world is not, I believe, in what we teach, not a good idea of the term resilience. So we spent 2 weeks talking about essentially English words, and we spend another 2 weeks talking about the very basic methodology of the mathematical modeling of systems. And so every PhD student has a month where we just understand English and arithmetic.
Thank you. The same question about the importance at the local level, global level, and maybe you can add something to how do you perceive the word, the concept resilience?
Actually, I perceive the concept of the word resilience in the same way Mary described. That you're thinking of it as like an ecosystem, and you want the ecosystem to survive, not the details of any one population in that ecosystem. That there's going to be forces that move it, and the question is, I think projecting ahead, and what the science community can do is provide scenarios with what ifs. If forests are managed like this, where are we looking down the road 30, 40 years with climate change if you keep on going along this road? So you can provide scenarios. But in the end, I guess the one thing I experienced is that it's so important to, as scientists, we can bring a science to inform where that trajectory might be, where you might go, how you understand how the system works. But it's often when you try to come up with solution's the wrong word, but an approach to managing a certain ecosystem, unless you understand, from the user, or from, in this case, maybe the forestry group, what their constraints are, and what their maybe lack of knowledge is, you can't really define the question you want to ask. Almost, there's some give and take there, back and forth. We're trying to understand terminology. And it's more than terminology. It's like you might have the greatest forecasts of upwelling conditions off the coast, but if it's not useful to anybody, then it's useless information. And so often I found, for example, working with rice producers in Indonesia, one thing that I would have never understood was they don't actually care how much rain is happening when it's raining. They care how long the monsoon is going to be. And that's not something that me or my community would have looked at 5 or 10 years ago, unless we actually talked with them long enough to understand what their constraints were, what the real issues were for them. And then we can look back and say, well, it turns out that we actually do have something to deliver in terms of the duration of the monsoon, but it's not a problem that we would have looked at. So I think that discussion, that give and take, I never think of this as, and this is going to be, I think, a challenge with Chile, is that it never works from top down. You're solving, you might solve the wrong problem, you actually don't understand how the decision affects the community. So it really is kind of a give and take. I think it's really important. And then the question is, how do you do that if the governance structure of the country doesn't allow that well? It's in the case of the U.S. is a great example. So what happens in the U.S. is you get around the table with state officials and companies, all around the same table, and you kind of work on, and you can say, okay, who's stressed in this situation and why? And can you come up with a management solution or trajectories forward that actually are tolerable for some people and work great for other people, but don't really put someone in a bind? Suddenly, there's just going to be a pushback, and there will be no progress.
Before turning it over to Tong, let's stay on the U.S. for a second. Politically, what's happening? The cut of funds for research is going to impact certainly research on climate change. The fact that many Obama legislation is being reversed in the area of environment. How are you living through that process? Because it's a tough one. I'm sorry, but I think it's because we all work with U.S. scientists.
Yes.
We all collaborate and have joint ventures with U.S. scientists, and for us it's interesting to know how the U.S. science community will be dealing with it.
Certainly. There's a larger problem with higher education in the United States that we're not solving, which is a financial problem. But let's look within just climate sciences.
Yeah.
It's an issue, even though it's going to be very difficult for Trump to actually undo a lot of what's, a lot of the legal requirements right now because of Supreme Court case decisions in the U.S. The U.S. has to regulate CO2 under the U.S. law, so it actually has nothing to do with Kyoto. The U.S. has to do that, and those laws can't be turned back easily. At least 4 years, if not longer. So the damage actually in the U.S. is the funding agencies for research, the NSF, National Science Foundation, NOAA. These agencies are all basically really worried about if they put up a climate program or a call for proposals that basically their budgets will get cut. And that's easy to do, and it's being done. And so what you see already is NOAA is pulling back and they're taking things that they used to say for climate, and they're either not calling climate or they're closing them down. So the most prestigious postdoc program in the United States, the NOAA Climate Global Change Program, is probably dead, which is a disaster.
It's a disaster.
And so what is that signal that's going out is that graduate students now who are coming in are saying, do I have a future in this field, or should I do something else? So there's the short-term impact on graduate students are worried about the career. The very near-term problem is that funding is going down for research, and of course a lot of the web pages that the government serves that have data on it have disappeared. Right? So there's a lot of damage that's being done, but I think the Kyoto is not going to be undone probably. In part because if you talk to the corporations in the U.S., they're in it for the long term, and they know this is going to go away, and so the coal companies are not going to reinvest in coal. I mean, this is financially stupid, and so I don't think it'll set things back that much in terms of Kyoto. It's going to set things back hugely in the United States in terms of climate research, no question about it.
Oh, that's a disaster. Let me go and ask Tong about the role of a climate change research center in putting the issues you discussed. You mentioned several issues in the agenda, in the public policy agenda, at the local level in China.
Yeah, we know that climate change is a global issue. Everybody talking about that. But when it comes to the importance, how climate change influence on your daily life, why you put it on a priority, people tend to put the local issues above the global issues. And so I think it's very important for the people at the different backgrounds to understand, even though global climate change is a global issue, but actually it has impact at a different region, and even though the issue could be different, but they are all linked to the global climate change relevant. For example, in China, we may not have the mega drought here, but we may have a mega flood. It's very important. We just this year we have the flood, maybe the historic records, and there's also a high temperature, and this kind of nature relevant disasters happen in China quite often. So we are concerned or not, and most of them are relevant to the monsoon system. So that's why we put the monsoon and all these floods, and also somehow certain kind of drought with that. But I think the impact is much more beyond than this one, nature disasters, because we are also seeing the urbanization and global. Now China moving from about 30% people living in the cities about 20 years ago, now have more than 50. We have the most mega cities on Earth. We see the mega cities that the population more than 10 million. So I think China have 10 or dozens of mega cities in China. And what this causes to our nature system, to the coast area, and so this is a very important issue. And then how the climate change, air pollution impacts on the people's living there. This is a big concern. So I think because we are living on Earth, it's Earth system, each component interact, linking to each other. So this global system, but in the locally, it could be the priority of the issues could be differently. and the people could address us differently. But no matter what, it's we have to consider it as a global issue, reflect on the local.
Understood. Besides human capacity building, besides research, what other role do you see for the Centers of Excellence? For instance, in impacting policymakers, or in promoting education among the general population, or help clarify misunderstandings. There's a lot of confusion in the public opinion about climate change. There are deniers and non-deniers, there's press information, there's fake news. So also, besides the research area and the capacity building, how do you see your role in terms of policymaking and in contributing to better understanding climate change and resilience, I would add, among the general population?
There are some very specific activities that we do in South Africa. The business sector, if you're a company director, you have to register. So there's a company register. And every 6 months, an advocacy body like a Specialist Research Institute on Climate Change, particularly, they write a 1-page brief on what is the economic impact of a particular issue that's topical. If it's around urbanization or if it's around the health impacts of emissions, etc. So that goes to the business sector, and because it's easy access, you write 1 page, they put it onto the system, and immediately 200,000 directors of companies know what the economic impact is for that. So that's one of the mechanisms we use. The second mechanism that seems to be most useful in South African society are primary school children. Those are children between the ages of about 10 years old and 14. They're the most impressionable, and they're the people that are aware, essentially, of the future. And so if we can impress that group of people, so a lot of our education programs are with that age group,
10 to 14.
10 to 14, that age group, and then the churches in South Africa are also very instrumental in spreading the climate change message. And it's a very wide range. It's from very, very fanatical Muslims all the way through Catholics, all the way through to Pentecostals. But it doesn't matter which church group you're in, the church community has played a significant role. So an advocacy body is, as David also said, people will come to us with a specific question. And if it requires research, then we'll go and look for money to do the research. But then we make sure that we synthesize what we've done and then make it available to school children in their words. Likewise with the business sector. And in the government sector, you really have to work on to know which ministers are going to be receptive. And in certain cases in South Africa, because of the governance or misgovernance, we have lots of acting director ministers. They don't get appointed for a long time. So you've developed a relationship for 3 years with one minister, and that minister goes to the wall. So you've got to start all over again. And I think it's an acceptance that you have to do. You've got to continue, so we call it grit. It's persistence in working with government ministers.
Thank you very much, Mary. I think we face many of the same issues here. Laura, I think it's a great idea what Mary has suggested about how to work with the private sector. We have also a register of board members, and maybe we can figure out a way on how to get to them. So, sorry, David.
No, I think we have a lot of the same things. I mean, we don't have something where we post the implications and the costs, which I think is a great idea. But we are often approached by industry or sometimes by local government or state government and saying, will you look at this? And then there's a dialogue and there's a discussion there. And like Antonio was saying, at the end of the day, these industries can be your best advocate. I mean, they're the people who can walk into the government office and say, okay, let's make this happen. And if they realize this is at least not to their disadvantage to do it, they're gonna be able to make things happen a lot more than we would on our end, even if we think we have the right answer, which is not usually the case. So I think that dialogue, it's all informal. It's a great idea to document it in the end. To say, like, this has been a success story. This adventure that we took together actually in the end didn't cost this industry. They didn't have to close down, but actually led to something that was healthier and more sustainable for everybody involved. And there's lots of examples of that, but I think showcasing them at the end of the day is important. It takes a little bit of the fear away from other people who all of a sudden feel like, okay, they're in the bullseye now. They're the people responsible for this aspect of environmental damage, and that give and take around over quite a bit of time in the same room it's a little bit more of a safe environment, and more likely things are going to happen.
Thank you. Tong, do you want to maybe refer to the role of like your center beyond research and beyond capacity building? How do you deal with education or with promoting policy changes?
Yeah, I think it is for us. It's not to catch up because general public education regarding climate change in China is not a special topic that we put high priority. It's more like all the other scientific issues people are interested in. But now I think it is very important, like the government, they have these initiatives. They want to have certain kind of industrial sectors to have advanced. So they have initiated certain kind of special policy, like the green energy, for example. And then that makes the companies, the private sectors, much more interested in what the climate change implication. And the government set a platform for the carbon trade, and that makes them very important to pay attention to their own operation to reduce the carbon emission. So this, in the sense that they've been educating themselves, or as David said, they came to us asking for the knowledge and suggestions. So I think the private sectors, they are very active in searching for knowledge solution, and in the sense why they identify new business opportunities and new technology, and they have also the kind of network themselves. We collaborate with them to help them to build up this network to distribute knowledge and ideas to share with them. So this is, I think, the way we operate in differently. And the most now, I think now, especially in the clean technology, they are, because of the government policy, they are reacting this aspect. There are certain cities, they have certain kind of model cities. The government would like set up a kind of model city like the eco-civilization type of cities, and because if they are into the category, they got a special fund from the central government. So the cities, they are competing for the policy and also to become one of them, and they can more advance for that. So there are different ways to deal with things like this. Yeah.
Exactly. I think we can take some questions from the audience, either to the panel or to any of the specific panelists.
You may use one of those. You can ask the questions in Spanish or in English?
Yes, in Spanish.
Or in Chinese.
Or in Chinese.
Next time around. So, Paulina?
Yes. Well, Thank you very much for the very relevant talk. I cannot agree more with Mary and David about the definition of resilience and how you apply it. But David talked about that it's very relevant to use bottom-up approaches, and we hear this over and over again. So I was wondering if you could give us some examples, maybe both of you, to how to implement and achieve that bottom-up approaches. Because in the CR2, we have moved and made advance about bottom-up approaches, but we still have a long way to go. So I will be happy to ask for successful experience.
Another pregunta. Tal cual. Puede ser que tengan cantando. Bueno, alguien. No questions. Inquisitive scientists.
Yeah. Over there.
Bien, Fabrice.
Thank you. This is a question to all three panelists. I mean, if we want to implement resilience or adaptation measures, these kind of things, especially bottom-up, we're involving companies. We have to come up to convince, well, with ways for these companies to make money. So, do you have any experience, to convince companies to actually make money using adaptation and mitigation strategies?
Well, I think those are two great questions. Maybe David, do you want to start, or Mary?
So some very local examples. I think some of the resilience areas have to be at the small scale that affect people, and then they also have to be at a much larger scale in the business sector, for example. So one of the things in South Africa over the last 20 years has been an incredible increase in the amount of litter in the environment. And it's an attitudinal behavior that if you have and it's mostly plastic litter, if you've got a plastic bag, we have moved from abject poverty, where people couldn't even buy a plastic bag in the old days, and now they've got enough money to buy a plastic bag. And then there's almost a behavioral change to say, I don't need this plastic bag anymore. I'm rich. I can buy another plastic bag. Even though in the global scale they're still way below the poverty line. Okay? So they throw the plastic bag over the fence of their property, and then it's gone from view. And if it's gone from view, it's disappeared. So in those cases, the resilience is what we're interested in as more environmental scientists, is the long-term sort of cradle-to-grave calculation of how many people it takes to clean that plastic up, what are the possible contaminants in the water, those kinds of things. And we've gone back to the local people and run campaigns because we feel that the resilience in that system needs to be pointed out, that it's not going to be an increased trajectory of more and more plastic bags, which is what will happen if there's no intervention. So resilience in a very sort of local system like that, for us, was to move away from plastic in the environment to paper in the environment. Because that, we believe, is the long-term environmental consequences would be less, but the people would not be in a space where they had nothing to carry their shopping in, but now to carry it in paper. So they were better off, both environmentally and personally. So they're really what seem trivial little things like that, but it does actually makes a difference for us in the environment. Then there are big issues. Like, South Africa is a mining industry, and you cannot tell them not to mine coal any longer, because we would then lose 25,000 jobs in the country. So how do you convince the mining industry that they shouldn't invest in coal. So the companies in South Africa could not be incentivized at all. And what was useful in some ways was that they had to either go to the Development Bank of Africa or to the World Bank to borrow money for coal mining. And those two companies, or those two donors, if you like, said to the South African coal industry, unless you essentially clean up your act and put in place innovations, mechanisms for mining cleaner coal and changing the industrialized process, they will get no money in loans from the World Bank. So it was for them a completely financial driver. But then, if they mined cleaner coal, they could then get cutbacks on the carbon tax, and they could get a higher export price because we send most of our coal to China anyway. So economically, it was good for the company because they could get loans and they could get better coal. So that for them was actually enhanced economic resilience. So these are tiny little examples, but there's ones around GM maize farming and increasing resilience of food security. So those are the kinds of smaller problems or smaller issues that we're dealing with.